This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft, because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. I have a question for you. See, I have a variety of courses and workshops over at storyworksfiction.com, from mini courses to self-directed masterclasses to live masterclasses, and in 2021, I want to bring you more live workshops where the emphasis is on both writing and critiquing your work while exploring a craft topic. The newest workshop, opening soon, is all about the first 50 pages of a novel. We're going to look at a variety of genres and options to showcase just how many ways there really are to write a great opening. If you've been listening to me for a while, you know my cardinal rule of writing. You can do anything you want, so long as you do it well. Now, as I think about the rest of 2021 and what I can create for you, I'd love to hear from you. What workshops would you like to have? Let me know through email, via the contact forms on my websites, or through social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook. That's Alida Wintern on Instagram and Alida Winternheimer author on Facebook. While I'm mentioning social media, February is the month of love, so I'm spreading the love to my writing community. Follow and interact with me on Instagram and Facebook, the author page, not my personal page, and you'll be entered to win a digital gift basket of writing goodies at the end of the month. The more you engage, the more entries you'll have in the drawing. So please let me know what kind of workshops interest you, and join me on Instagram or Facebook. And good luck! Hello and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Today, Robert, Kathryn, and I are going to talk about the essential nature of story. And I think we're going to be going in a few different directions here, so we won't try and nail it down too tightly at the beginning. Part of this is that story is everywhere. We crave stories. We need stories. And another piece of this that we were kind of chatting about before we started recording is that thinking of our supporting characters as the center of their own stories will help us ensure that they are not wooden, so that we don't only see them as a part of the protagonist story, but as something richer. So There we go. That's our introduction, and whatever else comes of it. Room to play. So let's start with the fact that story is everywhere and we crave story. Kathryn,
I think it's
I'm throwing it over to you.
Natural structure. It's just like this structure that we all are like instinctually part of. And I think if you recognize that everyone around you at all times is probably searching for stories around them, it's kind of an interesting way of starting to think. And I've been thrown into this a lot with my toddler lately, who just tells me stories about everything that's going on. And all of her stories have beginnings, middles, and ends. And the conflict is often very toddler-esque and imaginary. But it's fantastic because then you can start to see how even in her brain, story has influenced her. You know, she went somewhere, she did something, she came back, and it's this like journey that she has gone on. And I think coming back kind of to what you were saying, Alida, about like supporting characters and how you can use this in writing, like if you think about every movement as this kind of story that people are going on, and they see the story, everybody's waiting for an ending, everybody thinks they're in the middle of something or they're at the beginning of something, and there's that anticipation. So we can start to kind of form this like idea and this pattern that we see, you know, in our own lives and in the lives of other people around us, and it can help us to be more observational and aware and things like that. So anyway, there you go. There's my take on that.
Right. I love what you just said about everybody thinking they're in a beginning, a middle, or an end, because it made me think, oh, and then when our protagonist is in the middle of this plot arc, maybe a primary supporting character wants the beginning of some subplot arc, and that's in conflict with what our protagonist is doing, and then you're creating that, the complications that we need in our subplots along the way. And if we just think of the supporting character as the hero of their own journey, and wow, it just opens up like so many more possibilities for creating those complications on our protagonist arc.
Don't get overwhelmed.
Oh, wait, was that?
No, but it's true, right? Because then, like, your primary supporting character may be so excited about this new journey that they think that they get to go on, and it may be a total, like, throw for a loop for your protagonist. Like, wait a second, you want me to do what? You need me to be where? You need me to do what? And they're in the middle of, like, the mire section. And we all have these sections in our lives, right, where we know we're slogging through the middle. We're like, I can't see the end of it yet, but I know it's coming, right? And if somebody comes at you and they're in a different place in their story, sometimes you can be like, can you just kind of come sit in the mud with me? Because I don't really want to deal with you right now, jumping up that hillside, like. So yeah, it can do some really fun conflicts and interpersonal things for your characters. So
yeah I also love that your toddler is already telling stories with beginnings, middles, and ends. It just like verifies that this stuff is innate. We cannot escape it, and that's so cool that
it is really
that this is
cool.
how we live our lives,
I think it's how we make sense of things, isn't it? Maybe it's something to do with the fact that we have a perception of time, and so therefore we have to somehow anchor time to something, and therefore what we anchor it with is what happened, and and then the what happened needs to have some meaning behind it, because that's what's driving us innately, perhaps. So you can imagine the absence of story. If you switch on the TV to watch the news and they're saying, today in Seattle, a bank dispensed 320 deposits, withdrawals, and received 532 deposits.
And?
Yeah, great. That was fascinating.
Why do I care?
So much, yeah. So, exactly. So we're all like, and? The point is, so it's that whole thing about every story needs a point. Well, why? It is because we're trying to make sense of it. We're trying to understand what happened. We're trying to figure out, is that something that's analogous to the way I live my life? Do I need to take that on? There's some fabric, I think, as you say, both of you, that's essential to how we comprehend what goes on around us. People don't turn on the news to anything other than to find out what happened. What is today's story?
Right.
That's headline story is. So the fact that we're doing that with basic factual information, and our factual needs have to be turned into stories for us to make sense of them, says that it's just everywhere.
Well,
it's interesting because those facts created this anticipation inside of me, right? Like, I'm anticipating, where is this leading? And I think it's like we don't do well with that, right? We don't like to live in anticipation. Like, we want to know, like,
but how did it end?
Exactly.
Yes.
What happened to that bank?
Right. Well, and it points out, too, that facts are not engaging. They might be interesting, but you need to put those facts inside of a story, give them a narrative shape in order for people to want to hear more, in order for people to really make sense of them, have a feeling about them, engage with them. And if there's conflict and drama, all the better. If you said that bank had X deposits and Y withdrawals, oh, and by the way, then it was robbed. Now we've got a story to tell.
Exactly.
Yeah, and even Arya's little story had a plot. There were monsters and we ran away. So there was an action and a reaction, a cause and an effect, and she was the hero of it. She made herself the protagonist and gave herself a villain, and that's awesome.
Imagination in toddlers is fantastic. She can turn any trip to her bedroom into running from tigers or saving someone or making sure it's cold outside right now. So a lot of times people are just trying to get warm. So they have to make it inside to get warm. And then they make it inside and they're finally warm. And it's the end of the story. And it's just, they're little tiny little vignette stories, but you get the full thing, which is pretty fun. Pretty fun.
Mm-hmm. That is
it's amazing
fun.
how they're everywhere, isn't it? It really is extraordinary. I mean, even if you're just relating to people around us, you know, I went to the supermarket and they didn't have any bread.
Yeah.
Okay.
And? Right. And? Where's the
I went to
story?
the supermarket. They didn't have any bread. So I thought I'll get this baguette instead, and that would be really nice, and perhaps we could have a lunch. Oh, yeah, okay. That, you know, all of a sudden there's something happen, and there's a result of that conflict and the inciting incident of there being no bread.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It's bizarre, isn't it, how it's everywhere. It's quite, you know, as you say, normally we're completely unconscious of it, but the fact that you mentioned off air, Kathryn, that you've been watching zoo shows and then Aria doing this sort of thing, it brings this sudden conscious awareness that, hey, hang on a minute, this is just everywhere.
It's everywhere. Everywhere.
Right. And I think one of the essential elements of story that your zoo show watching brought up is that stories set up a promise. You know, you said before we started recording that if they tell you the tiger's pregnant at the beginning of the episode, then at the end of the episode there'd better be a baby tiger. Right? So
no matter how many months have to pass without us really seeing them, that has to happen. Yeah.
Right. It's the promise being made. It's the hook, the setup. And then if that isn't delivered on, your audience is going to be disappointed in the story. The narrative will have failed the reader expectations.
Right. And you think about like how like they could potentially be putting artificial like story inside of this, right? Because like literally these people are just getting up every day, going to work, doing their normal job, coming home. But then this TV network, right, comes in and creates stories out of what is going on in their lives, right? But at the same time, these really are complete stories that are happening. They're just being edited into a smaller time frame, right? So you have to discover that the tiger is pregnant and then go through the pregnancy journey with the tiger, and the tiger has the baby. That's going to happen regardless of whether or not someone tells it as a story, right? And then it's that reframing that makes it interesting. Because I could just tell you, hey, there was a zoo that had a tiger that had a baby, and you're going to say, okay, cool.
That was nice.
But if I hook you in with, oh my gosh, it's so exciting, I got to go watch this vet take an ultrasound on a tiger today, all of a sudden you're hooked, right? You want to know the whole journey all the way through to completion. Is the baby healthy? Is it growing? Oh, look at it, so cute, right? So it's that reframe of normal everyday happenstance that, I mean, you could just go through, like Robert with the bread and the baguette, right?
Yeah.
If you reframe it into a story, all of a sudden, right? That's what we do.
Yes. It's like having the eagle cams and the nests, you know, the DNR departments set up, or eagles or hawks or whatever. And so you can go online and you can watch an eagle sitting in a nest. And if you're really lucky, you might see the chicks hatch or something, or you might see them being fed. But you're just a fly on the wall observer. And so as cool as that is, it's not the same as having a narrative structure, framing an event, and having things, you know, in reality TV, it's edited together. They take hours and hours and hours of footage and cut it down and rearrange it and shape it to create that narrative. But as storytellers, as writers, we're doing the same thing, but without the hours and hours of footage. We're just inventing it raw. You know?
Right. And maybe, again, though, maybe you do have hours and hours of footage in the
or
form
thousands
of
and thousands of pages.
Thousands of words, right? Or pages. Yeah. And you got to reframe it and organize it. You know, this is the whole thing with like background versus history versus, you know, information you actually need to get into the story, that whole thing, right? You have to frame what you have in a way that makes sense and is exciting and causes the anticipation in the reader or the viewer.
And also, I think that's where our own individuality comes in most amazingly. I was just thinking when you said hours and hours of footage, we all have our own hours and hours of footage of life, which are all utterly unique. No one has lived those exact hours of footage except ourselves. And so that's when people say, but this story's been written before. Well, not by you. And not with your hours of footage and your unique view of that and your understanding of what you bring to it. So I think, understanding that the story of your own life has shaped how you will tell the stories to your readers as well as is key. I mean, and as much as you're never going to. You might be writing things that are completely outside your experience. We're still drawing on the story of our own lives to create those new things and pull in the research and put it together in such a way that makes sense.
Right.
But I was also thinking as well that even in the most mundane things, going back to the news again, they'll set things up and say, and after the break, we'll be talking to a woman whose discovery in the Arctic will revolutionise how we treat modern diseases. And now I've got to come back. I've got to watch
right.
But they could have just stated the facts. You could have just tuned in to find the facts. But no, they've got to make it exciting and leave a little twist in there and a sting. So I think there's a lot you can learn by just watching those everyday little stories around us. And be taught by toddlers.
Ever feel like your story has you by the typewriter? If so, it's time to get that story in a workshop. Join Write Great Openings today and make sure your Act 1 blows your readers away. Get all the details at StoryWorksFiction.com and sign up today because seats are limited for this new live workshop.
Yeah. Another really interesting thing, I was watching some vlogs and stuff on YouTube. And if you watch really successful vloggers, I actually had one who I was watching one of their vlogs and I'm like, why am I so interested in this? And you can say, oh yeah, you like being an observer of other people's lives and stuff. And they just offhandedly mentioned, they're like, we filmed the whole thing and the storyline just didn't work. So we didn't do it. And I was like, well, that's so true, actually. If you watch like a good vlog, it's a full story, right? They don't just film, oh, this is my day, and you're watching their day. That would be boring. Yeah. But if they take, a week and they formulate that story and they edit it together into a cohesive unit, then all of a sudden you're interested, right? It's just like good fiction at that point because they've created and crafted their own life experiences down into a manageable storyline. Even if you aren't quite sure what that storyline is to begin with, or even after you're done watching it, that's what they've done. You know what I mean? So even successful vloggers do the same thing, hours and hours of footage. Here's their life, right? But they've created a little storyline for you to follow.
Here I thought there were some people who are just innately fascinating. They edit? Kathryn, I'm shocked.
What?
What? Oh, man. My illusion is gone.
I think there are people, though, who think that they can just film their life and put it up on YouTube and people will watch it, right?
Yeah.
But that's not what people are really tuning in for. They're tuning in for the stories of your life. So.
Right. And I think that's the difference between somebody who's just an exhibitionist who's trying to be sensational enough to get attention versus somebody who's actually crafting a narrative, in order to engage people.
Totally.
So how can we use some of these observations as we craft our supporting characters so that they aren't wooden and so that they do complicate our protagonists' lives? Let's see if we can get a little more into the crafting of that.
They each have their own story to tell, and that might be a little one, like my idea about going to the supermarket and not finding the bread. But it saves them. It saves you bringing them in just for the protagonist's point of view. It gives a reason for them to be acting, and I like the idea of the literal action and the essential action that comes from, I haven't quoted it before, but one of those famous actors, and the idea that the literal action is what they're doing, but there's an essential action which is what they're wanting to achieve at the same time. So when a supporting actor or character comes into the story, then there's going to be something that you want them to do. as the author because it's necessary to further the plot. But if that's all that happens, it's just like a mechanical stating of the facts on the news. It doesn't mean anything. And we can deepen that and round it up by making it make sense to that character because it's part of their story. And whether it's something that's conscious or even unconscious, if you're capable of crafting it in such that you've tapped into their character and their very nature and their motivations, then that's how sometimes even supporting characters can become a mini antagonist at times to the main character because their story suddenly gets in the way of the main character's story. So I think that's how we flesh them out, that they don't become just pieces that form part of the protagonist's puzzle, but they are pieces in their own puzzles.
Right. They have to be more than accessories to the protagonist. And I think key to what we're talking about here is giving the supporting characters something that they want for themselves, something separate from the protagonist. So if we're talking about, a couple, maybe the supporting character wants to take a job. Maybe it's a job that requires a move, or it's a job that requires a lot of travel or working a lot of overtime or something that makes it difficult for the protagonist to keep fulfilling the protagonist's goal, or is difficult for the protagonist to support, not because he's a bad person, but because it is so complicating to everything else going on in the main storyline, and so then that creates more complication and a source of conflict that's like a sub-conflict. You've got the protagonist, antagonist, or antagonistic force main plot line. And when these complications aren't just like, I tripped over your roller skate and now I'm angry, but it's like a conflict that's going to really have ripple effects throughout their lives, that's when it's got more depth and more interest and can have more forward movement, create more forward movement through the whole storyline.
Yeah, and then you can bring in, things that if you didn't have that underlying story of the supporting characters, then it would just seem like a convenient, consequence or coincidence. And whilst they're okay occasionally, I think, to drive plots forward, when the consequence or coincidence comes as a result of a believable storyline from a supporting character that may even intertwine partly with a subplot, as you say, or just some part of the protagonist's life, all of a sudden we've got a fabric there that's three-dimensional. And so I think those are the stories that you get really, really drawn into because they make sense to the way we live our lives. There are lots of supporting characters in our lives that we don't necessarily take any real notice of, but they've all got stories of their own and things that they need, and sometimes those things conflict with us, and they're not our antagonists. They're not out to make our lives miserable, but sometimes they do because what they want doesn't fit well with what we want.
Right.
I'm gonna take kind of a different. I'm going to do something different here.
Excellent.
Bear with me. I think you can also use this as a tool to get your supporting characters involved with your protagonist in ways that make the reader understand. So like your protagonist is involved in the story, right? And they can then tell it to the supporting character in a way that makes them want to be part of it. Does that make sense? So like, if I was going to call up my mom and be like, the store was out of bread, right? Like, what do I do? Right? My mom might just be like, okay, whatever. But if I say, Mom, I'm hosting a dinner party and the store was out of bread, all of a sudden she wants to become a part of that story and help me out, right? So if you're using supporting characters and you want them to support the protagonist actively and you want them to be passionate and involved, maybe have your protagonist give them a story, right? And now maybe your protagonist doesn't give them the whole story, and maybe that is something that your readers know, and that can be, tension and issue between the characters later. But if your protagonist just says, I need you to come help me move this body, right? Okay, the supporting character is all of a sudden like, eh. And if they just do it, your reader's going to be like, why did they just do that, right? They'd have no clue. But if your protagonist says, gives them a little bit of a backstory and what's at stake, and this is what they could do to help be the hero, right? All of a sudden they're involved. They want to be part of that, and it moves them through. So it gives them better believability, and it helps to kind of view it as the protagonist reframing it for the supporting character, so that then they also want to be part of the story, giving a little more believability and stuff. So anyway, that's where my brain went.
I like that. Yeah, that's good. That's like Aria coming in and telling you, one of her stories, and you them getting drawn into it, and so we're all drawn into each other's. Yeah.
It's the toddler coming in and saying the monsters are chasing me. Yeah. Okay, have fun. You run for those monsters, or Mom, I need you to help me, because if I can get up here, I can escape the monster. Okay, let's do it. Right?
Yeah. What do we need?
Yeah, exactly.
Do we need the magic pencils?
Right. How do we defeat these monsters? I'm in it with her, right? Versus an outside observer. So
nice.
I like how in one moment Mom was bringing you a loaf of bread, and in the next moment Mom was helping you move a body. I'm not sure we're in the same plot, or if you use the bread to get Mom over to move the body.
Welcome to the brain of a woman with a 4-month-old. Now you're all in my story.
No, that's good. The stakes went right up. I was like, okay,
right, exactly.
All right, we are moving bodies at Kathryn's. Yes. Yeah, I love that. And also, you made me think of the issue of truth. How much is the protagonist going to tell the supporting character to get that character in? Is it the truth? Is it a half-truth? Is it an outright lie? Is it forgivable? So there are all kinds of ways to use this idea of having your characters create stories for each other, and each character being the center of his or her own story in order to create tension and complications and to keep moving the plot forward. That's brilliant. Thank you for listening to the StoryWorks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.